Welcome back for another episode of Husky Careers Unleashed. I'm Ryan, and I'll be your host again this week. And we've got a special guest from our Michigan Tech family joining us today. So, to kick off our episode, let's have her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zoe Wahr, soon to be Cashler. I was married back in November, so we're starting that change process, which is exciting. I am a alumni of Michigan Tech. I graduated in the spring of 2020. I am now a licensed civil engineer with about 5 years experience in the industry.
Very nice. And although our time at Tech crossed over, I don't know that we really had much of an opportunity to meet when we were both students there. But our topic today that we're going to be focusing on is how to turn recruiter conversations into job opportunities, which I think everybody's always looking for new opportunities and any kind of tips, tricks, hints that we can talk about today to help them with their networking and kind of finding those opportunities, I think will be really helpful. So to kick it off, do you have any kind of topic you want to dive into right off the bat?
So I have two topics that I kind of think are important for everyone to think about. A little bit of food for thought. If you don't, it's not the end all be all. But first things first, go to career fair early as a freshman, as a first year, get there, get the practice in, start to have those experiences when it's low stakes, low pressure. You don't even need to want to have a job that summer, but go and take it in and see what it's about. Um, it's a special skill to be a conversationalist, and going early to career fair and starting to develop those skills will help you. It pays dividends through your career as a college student, through your career as a professional, in your personal life. Take that opportunity to practice having conversations with people. And it's okay to mess up. It's okay to fumble your words. It's okay to need to take a moment to gather your thoughts, take that deep breath, do it. Absolutely do it. That's my first piece of advice, that if I could give anyone anything, that's that. The second thing, and I did this personally as a student up at Tech, and it paid off. Apply the job you want weeks ahead of career fair. Don't wait for the night before. It doesn't really help you. It does get you in the system. It is important to do. But if you apply 3, 4, 5 weeks ahead of time, it gives those people services, human resources, admin individuals time to process your resume and get it in the hands of the recruiters. And they oftentimes recognize you before you recognize them at that point, because not many people do it. And it helped me tremendously when I did that little experiment, and I encourage people to do that as well. So those are the two pieces. If we cover nothing else, those are the two pieces.
And I think that's a great spot to start, especially, I mean, I'll poke fun at the two of us because we both have engineering degrees. Engineers have kind of a stigma that we're not always the best communicators. We're great at the technical stuff, but getting this real life experience and practice is really important. So I 100% agree with you. That first career fair opportunity you have to go to, do it. Put yourself outside of your comfort zone and just have those conversations. I always like to remind students that recruiters are people. They're not scary. They were probably in your shoe at one time, especially at Michigan Tech. A majority of our recruiters coming to career fair are Michigan Tech alum. And so they've been there. They know what you're going through. And they are not mean or scary people. So that kind of drives us into our first question, which you kind of touched on is how do you first connect with recruiters early in your career or while you're still in school?
So there's a couple ways to connect with recruiters, and it kind of starts even before you get face to face with a recruiter. And that starts by connecting with your career services individuals, your counselors, your advisors in your department, and getting to know them and coordinating with them so that they can help find opportunities. Or oftentimes, when companies reach out to department advisors or chairs or deans, you're the name that comes up in their mind of, oh, so and so has been reaching out to me. I know them really well. I like their work ethic. I think they'd be a good fit for this company. I know the company's culture. Here's this person's name. So kind of thinking about it as like a passive networking. It's networking that's being done that you don't have to do. That would be my first step because those are people that you see every day, you have access to most days, and it's less scary at that point because they're part of your Husky family there. Beyond that, connecting with recruiters, especially like when you're at career fair, asking them questions that can't be answered with yes or no. Asking them, for example, hey, I saw that your company has employee resource groups or interest groups. I'm really interested in those and leadership positions within those. Are there's are there opportunities for that? And not only does it show interest in the company, it could say allow that recruiter to say, "Oh, I'm a part of one of those employee resource groups, and here's what we do, and here's how you could get involved right off the bat." So it's kind of a two-part question there. You're learning about the culture of the company, and you're learning about that person and making a personal connection.
Well, and another great resource that's available, not just Career Fair, is our Career Fest events. It's much more informal. It's in between class time. It's your opportunity to really connect with the recruiters who, again, are mostly alum and want to talk to students. So having that name recognition, that visual of like, oh, wait, I talked to you a couple of weeks ago during this fest event. Now you're here at Career Fair. We also saw your application come in, so it's really kind of like you said, building that network and connecting with these people. And one of the things that I was always taught is it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And in your professional career, having a strong network is really important to help you figure out kind of where you want to go, what you want to do. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, you need to know your stuff and have the skill set to get the job done, but it'll be way easier as you start networking, connecting with these recruiters, and really building those relationships with them so that it's not just the first time you're seeing them or you're applying to a job online that it just feels like it's going into the void. So I think the relationship side of it is definitely one of the most important aspects and one of the easiest things you can start to do as a student at Michigan Tech.
Absolutely. And with that, don't be afraid to say, hey, my friend, my roommate, my sorority sister, whoever also worked for your company and really enjoyed it. And it could be that that recruiter you're speaking to personally worked with them, and that's awesome. It could be they say, oh, they must have been in a different division, or that's not my office location, or whatever. But it automatically gives you a connection. And they'll likely go and look up that person that they worked with at the same company and maybe connect with them, but it just gives you one more layer of connection there and helps you stand out a little bit more than the rest of the crowd. Those are great things to do, and also related to that, making connections and helping staying connected with recruiters and companies beyond career fair. If they have a business card, or if they have just a generic card at their table, or if you just carry a stack of sticky notes, when you're going around speaking to people, take notes of like two or three things that you found really important about that person or impactful about the company, and follow up with that individual with an email. And it's great to just have that email connection afterwards to say, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciated it. But I would encourage you to go one step further and maybe even ask for like a 30-minute coffee chat or something else to kind of help you get to know the company. It helps you get to know the company a little bit better, but also helps you establish that connection with that person so that, maybe there's not a job opening this summer at that particular location you were looking for. But again, you'll be the first person they think of because you reached out and took that chance. And it doesn't take much time. It's a 30-second email, it's a 2-minute response on my part or the recruiter's part, and then boom, connection.
Well, and in the realm of connection, obviously, students should prepare for career fair ahead of time. You don't want to be going in there blindly, just talking with a company that you really don't know anything about. What kind of advice would you give a student on the type of research or information they should look up about a company before doing outreach to a recruiter, either at career fair or virtually through like LinkedIn?
So I would ask the student to first reflect internally on what is important to them and what they value, and then spending a little bit of time on those companies' websites to see if they openly advertise things that align with what you find important. Do they talk about employee resource groups? You're going to hear about employee resource groups a lot today, but it's important, and it's been something that I've heard a lot about in recent years from students during recruiting. Um, do they celebrate their employees' personal successes? Are they sharing that they passed their FE or their PE? Are they highlighting volunteer hours? Are those things important to you? Do they do like employee appreciation happy hours or things like that? Are those things that are important to you? And does the company obviously make it clear that those are important to them as well? So a base, I would start there. And if you find that the website shares those values and um, celebrates those things, then I would start to think, okay, are there things about things I do on university, on campus, that I can use to say, not only do I say that this aligns with me, but I'm showing that this aligns with me. And here's how. And if that's not already on your resume, make sure you include that in your elevator pitch when you first talk to a recruiter. Those are things important. They help us kind of understand who you are as a person, maybe what culture you're looking for, if you are someone that would prefer that there's already an existing young professionals group or young professionals um, like hired at that company at that specific location so that you can become part of that network and be welcomed in, or are you okay with being someone that you may be the youngest one at that location specifically, and are you okay with having to go via Teams or Zoom or whatever, and being a part of that type of network and starting to kind of nestle your way into narrowing down a office that might be best for you, all assuming that the culture of the company fits in the first place.
I think that's something that sometimes students overlook is company culture, location, activities. You're not going to be at your job 24 hours a day. It's going to be a portion of your day, yes, but what does your life look like outside of the job, and leveraging those resources on the employer website, looking at the geographical locations like Chamber of Commerce, things like that to figure out what's around, all really help kind of build that picture of what would life look like working in that area for that company, so that you can go in prepared as you start talking to recruiters and have a better understanding of kind of what is it all entails, for an opportunity in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a point that I had spoke about with Melissa, that I think sometimes students get into the mindset that they say, I'm going to say I'm open to anything, anywhere, and I'm guaranteed a job. And sometimes that can actually make it more challenging for the recruiter to appropriately place you or find a position for you. We love that you want to do anything and that you want to learn anything and that you'll take on any task that we give you. But things like exactly what we just spoke about play a big role in that. You can love your job and really enjoy what you're doing in your job, but if you don't enjoy the other X number of hours in the day because it doesn't fit your lifestyle, it doesn't have opportunities for you that you find fulfilling, it's really going to be difficult to enjoy your work every single day. Even something as simple as, do you prefer to camp on the weekends and does that need to be close to you, or do you prefer, a busy urban nightlife? Those are two very different locations and things that can greatly impact how you spend the rest of your time. And if you find yourself in the wrong spot, so to speak, with how you align with things, it can be really challenging. So it's important to at least take those things into consideration when you're picking out a location for a company.
So let's circle back to kind of a first interaction with a recruiter. Now, students might be nervous, and kind of in this first encounter, how does confidence play into this interaction? Because I know there's a fine line between confidence that can sometimes come off as arrogance, and how would you kind of give advice to students of how to kind of pick the right confidence level coming into that first interaction?
So I would say focus less on how confident you feel and spend more time preparing for that interaction. And I know that kind of sounds a little weird to conceptualize, but when I say be prepared for that interaction, I mean, spend the time finding the companies that you want to talk to. Say there's 8 companies you'd like to speak with. Set out 8 resumes and one sticky note on each resume. write the name of the company down and write down important things that you want to ask about for that company and have questions sorted out, regardless of which recruiter you speak to. Say, I know that I want to ask about PTO, or I want to ask about company get-togethers, or what sort of stewardship opportunities are available, and have those questions written out so you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to worry about what am I going to ask? What if they say this? These are the things that are important to me, and this is what I'm sticking with. And then practice saying those questions out loud. And you don't have to do it in a mirror, you don't have to do it to a friend or whatever. Just sit in your room if that's what you need to do and say the question out loud. One, it'll help you figure out, oh, that kind of sounded a little weird. I don't want it to sound like that. I'd prefer to word it differently. So it helps you figure out how you want to word it. And two, when you walk up to that recruiter and your mind goes blank because it's the 14th recruiter you've talked for the day, you have that sort of built in muscle memory, so to speak, of this is what my question is, this is how I want to say it. And it helps take one extra anxiety out of the situation. Um, and maybe because you prepared and had those questions, you practiced those questions out loud, now you appear to have confidence. And that's how you kind of develop it rather than trying to put on, I'll say, a tough face and pretend to be confident when you're not really. I think preparing is the best way to help yourself feel confident in those situations.
Well, and one of the things that students are probably going to leverage time and time again when they're opening the conversation with recruiters is kind of their elevator pitch. From your perspective and experience being on the side of a recruiter, what types of things would you like to hear from a student in that first 60 to 90-second elevator pitch?
I like to hear about leadership opportunities that that student has either taken advantage of, whether it was an organization on campus that that leadership position already existed, but they took the initiative to say, I want to be involved, I want to lead. So I want to hear about your leadership opportunities. And if it's not something on campus, it could even be something like you're a shift manager at the restaurant you work at, or the grocery store you work at, or whatever. Have some example of how, and it could even be that you're an oldest sibling. If that's truly your experience in life, that's fine. Say, and share those things about you. Talk about, say you don't have any experience in industry yet, you're that first year student coming in, you have no previous experience. Share how your either previous jobs or life skills play into why you think you're going to be a good fit. Do you work on a farm? Do you work at a restaurant? Do you work in customer service? These are all skills that are applicable to industry. And customer service, for example, working in a group, knowing how to communicate with people, maybe working with people that were a little frustrated and not at you but at the situation and how that all plays out. Those are critical skills that may not seem important at the time technically on paper, but they play a big role in how you fit into the big picture. Those soft skills, those people skills, those are what I look for the most. How they what they do in their spare time is another thing I look at. Again, more or less playing into where can that gives me an idea of figuring out where they would best geographically fit, that kind of thing. Um, I love to hear about your technical achievements, awards, that type of thing as well, just to show that you're like driven and ambitious. However, it's those soft skills that I tend to look for the most, because that's who you are as a person. That's what it's going to boil down to. It's okay to feel like you don't know enough technically for a role. We don't expect you to know those things. It's okay. Even if you're coming on as a full time entry level engineer or scientist or whatever, you've proven to us that you can get through the rigorous studying and you have the work ethic to get through the course load, regardless of what university you're at. But especially, I have a soft spot for Michigan Tech, I will admit. Um, but we know that you have the grit it takes to do all those things, and we will teach you the extra stuff that you need to know. It's okay. So that's what those are the types of things I look for when someone comes up to me and says, "Here's what's important for me. Now you have time to read my resume as I sit here and talk to you, and then let's ask some questions."
Well, and it's nice to hear that perspective from you. In our last episode, I was talking to Melissa about kind of different career paths, maybe not related directly to your degree. And kind of we touched on the transferable skills and soft skills. And so this is just proof that, yes, those are important. It's not just things coming out of our mouths at the university, but it's being reflected from industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, those technical achievements are incredible. They're awesome. They show that you are really passionate about the industry at large. But who you are as a person will not only help us determine if you fit in the culture, but also like you determine if you like us and vice versa. You know, it's a two-way conversation there. Um, and sharing those things that you're proud of, whether it's technical or not, is really important.
Well, and that segues perfectly into my next question because it's on the topic of two-way conversation. Ultimately, as students are interacting with recruiters, it shouldn't be one way. Um, have you ever been asked a question during a student recruiter interaction that kind of stood out to you and kind of made you think, or was like, oh, that's a really good thing to ask?
So I have had one individual, and it wasn't for, I'll say, personal gain as far as getting an internship or getting a full-time position. But they approached me and said, "Hey, I'm a part of such and such senior design group. We are seeking an industry mentor. Would you be interested in supporting us?" And then they shared about the project that they were working on and asked if we thought that there was someone at the company that I work for that would be a good fit for them. And we had that conversation and it went through. And then because I was so interested and really quite impressed with their thought to use this opportunity to seek mentors and industry experts for advice for this, I said, "Are you looking for an internship or a full time opportunity?" Because having that thought to even approach someone at career fair for that type of opportunity, like a mentor for their senior design group, or kind of coming at it from a different angle, it was really interesting, and that still sticks out to me the way that they were like very intentional with how they asked the question, and then it made me want to offer them a job, frankly. So um, I know that not everyone is looking for a mentor for their senior design group necessarily, but I guess in general, my advice would be to ask questions, and I had said this earlier, that can't be answered in yes or no. And it could be that a version of that question could be answered with yes or no, but the way that you word it leads to more conversation. Um, I remember more conversations that are good and have good flow, and you can tell they thought about it more than I do when someone comes up to me and asks me 5 questions that are yes, no, no, yes, so on and so forth. It just helped. Those are the things that I remember when they say, I get a phone call 3 weeks later from people services and they say, "Oh, did you speak to so and so?" And I'll look at their resume and I'll look at the notes that I took and I go, "Oh, yes, we talked about this specific portion of the company and they were really interested in this." And you could tell that they had really invested some time in it. Um, so that would be my advice, is going back to that, asking questions that can't be answered in yes or no.
I think that's awesome to hear that students were kind of thinking outside of the box from a networking perspective that ultimately made them stand out. And so, kind of having some of that creative thought behind what they're doing and having a plan going into those conversations is so important.
Talking about how you come into career fair and having that goal, I guess I'll say. I also think that that's a really important thing for students to do and reflect on before they go to career fair, and say, and it could be what feels like a small goal of, I just want to learn more about the company. I'm not going there to get an internship. I'm not going there to try and get a full time job, whatever it is. But like, if I do nothing but learn more about this company, then I will be okay. And setting goals that are attainable and within reach so that they don't feel exhausted at the end of the day or discouraged at the end of the day because they didn't get an interview position. I think another important thing to recognize is that many companies don't offer in person next day interviews for internship positions. They're often reserved for full time positions. And that's not to say that you won't get an internship interview in person the next day, but typically those are reserved for full time employees. So being realistic when you walk through those doors to say, I'm going here to make a connection. I'm going here to maybe pursue a mentor. I'm going here with something that is okay without it being the sun, the moon, and the stars. Try to avoid that all or nothing mentality because career fair is exhausting to start. Like it's a busy day, and I love career fair. I love talking to students. I loved going as a student, which is probably a little weird to hear, but I really enjoyed it. But it's very tiring because it's not something you do all the time. So having goals that you can look back on and say, "Hey, I did this, and that is enough." And being like, don't let someone else's success get you down if you didn't succeed in the way that they did, because everyone's success is different. And I think that's important for everyone to know, but especially students going through this career fair process.
Well, and we've spent a lot of time talking about kind of the in person, on campus, career fair focused interactions with recruiters and kind of building your network that way. For the last little bit of the episode, I'd like to kind of pivot towards LinkedIn and online outreach, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of what's your perspective on using LinkedIn as a tool, maybe for like a cold outreach to a recruiter or somebody that works at a company that you're interested in as you're trying to expand your network as a student?
I think it's a great tool. I think it's a great way to get to know the company. And again, it kind of goes back to what do they share on their website? What is that company sharing on their LinkedIn? Depending on the company, they may strictly be like corporate posts, and the company doesn't share employee posts or anything like that, but looking to see what they share. And then you can always figure out who works for that company, maybe who works in the division that you're interested in. Um, and sort of doing a little bit of research there. Also looking to see if that company does share, I'll say like individual or personal posts. What are they encouraging people to share about? And then from there, you can pull those bits of information, reach out to that specific person and say, hey, I see that you or your company shared this bit of information about this event or this conference or this opportunity. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about this. So have that excuse, I'll call it, to reach out to someone, and then from there, again, have that question of like, what was it like being involved with that? How does that make you feel after the event is over? What do you gain from it? How could I get involved if I were to be a part of the company? Those kinds of things um, are easy ways to reach out via LinkedIn. I would also encourage um, make sure to personalize the message a little bit. If it's a recruiter that you had met at career fair, making sure that you have those couple notes from your conversation with them, and include that in your message to that recruiter. We can tell when it's a copy paste change name of the first line of the message. We get it. You're busy and there's lots of people you're trying to connect with, but having one or two personal things or specific things about your conversation with that person goes a long way. They're much more likely to reach out to you um, if you have that sense of rapport there. Um, that would be how I would leverage LinkedIn in that way.
Well, and one of the other things that I like to do with LinkedIn is check and see if you have mutual connections with somebody that you're interested in reaching out to. And maybe reach out to that mutual connection first. Ask them if they're comfortable doing an introduction for you. So you're kind of bridging that gap and leveraging your existing network to help with a more personal introduction, like you had mentioned, rather than just a cold outreach, especially if it's not somebody that you've interacted with, say on campus or in person. So, yeah, definitely leverage those mutual connections and see if they're willing to do an introduction for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess along those lines, it was something that my people services individual had mentioned to me, but spending time getting involved in the organizations that you see that company active in. So, say for example, like the civil engineering world, APWA, so the American Public Works Association. I am heavily involved with that as an individual. ACEC is another one that we are as a company involved with, but figuring out what organizations are important to the industry. And most of the time, they have a collegiate section or version of it that you can start to get involved with. And we oftentimes host presentations, or AFC is another one. But, anyways, we host presentations for those organizations and can help you have an opportunity to get to know them outside of work. It's still in a professional sense because it's with these organizations, um, but it's a little, I'll say, less intimidating because it's in a different setting, so to speak. So that's another way that LinkedIn can be super helpful to see what conferences people are attending. If you can get involved before you're even trying to pursue them as a company, and kind of go through things that way. It's just something to consider as students are trying to craft their resume and steer themselves in a way. You can learn a lot about industry just by attending those types of informational meetings about those organizations, because you may find that you do lean towards the more legislative side of things rather than the technical side of things, or you prefer boots on the ground construction rather than doing design at the desk. And you can find those things out through those organizations without even having to have an internship or a co-op.
Well, and so we've talked about kind of building that relationship with a recruiter, kind of going along those lines. One of the things that I personally know I had struggled with while applying for jobs, and I think it would resonate with a lot of people, is the art of the follow up. So you've built this relationship, you've applied for the job, maybe you've already even had an interview, and you're hearing nothing back. There's a fine line between following up and being annoying. From your perspective, what kind of advice would you have for kind of the art of the follow up, for people who are maybe stuck in that limbo waiting for next steps?
Yeah, so I think it's absolutely okay to reach out and say, "Hey, I've applied. I was told to expect to hear back by now. Have you heard anything?" And it truly could just be an instance of things got backed up. Absolutely, we're on it. Thanks for the reminder. Here's a status, so on and so forth. Um, at the same time, understand that oftentimes the recruiters you see at career fair are not the individuals who are processing all of the resumes and the paperwork and setting up the virtual interviews. That oftentimes goes to people services, human resources, administration, that type of thing. Um, so we may not have the answer for you. So please don't be discouraged or frustrated when we say, "Hey, we don't have an answer, but I'm going to include our administrative person in this email so that hopefully you can get an answer." And it may take a few days because, like I said, things get backed up or whatever, but it's a, I encourage the follow up, I encourage the questions, but just be okay with having to wait a little bit. At the same time, if you have an offer from a company and maybe it's not your top pick and you would really be interested to see if you should be expecting an offer from another company, there's a way to phrase that email, and there's plenty of sources online to do this, that you can say, "Hey, I've received an offer from a company." You don't have to say which company, but "I've received an offer. However, I would really be interested to know if I have an opportunity with your company." And oftentimes they can streamline the process or say, "Oh, yes, we do. We were going to send it out on Friday, but we'll send it out to you today, knowing that you have a timeline on when you need to respond to your other offer, and let's have that conversation." And it can sort of help keep everyone on the same page, because it could just be that that first company that you heard from was quicker to respond for whatever reason, and this other company, they're getting to it. You are on their list. They do want to engage with you more and talk with you more or make you that offer. They just hadn't gotten through the process yet. So sometimes not hearing anything does not mean you didn't get it. You just need to, it's okay to reach out and say, "I've received an offer. but I would like to know if there's a chance here. And if there's not, then you have your answer and you can move on and move on with life. But it's okay to reach out with that. Please recognize that if you have the interview, you are qualified for the position. They are not going to interview people that they don't feel are fundamentally qualified. So don't let that stress you out as you go into that interview. What I would recommend then in your interview is using that as a time to ask questions that help you figure out both their personality as the person interviewing you and help that person interviewing you figure out your personality, figure out maybe share things about how you prefer to learn, how you prefer to work, how you prefer the environment at work to be. Do you like the idea of a hybrid situation or fully remote? What you're looking for, and start asking those questions that you wouldn't typically ask at career fair or wouldn't typically have time to ask at career fair or have those thorough discussions and focus more on that because as we've talked about this entire podcast so far, there's more to life, there's more to work than just going to work. So finding out all these other details about it and how you would fit in is what I would encourage you to focus on in those interviews. Keep in mind, you're still going to be asked probably a smart question where you have to have a scenario that you got through that was challenging and needing to have this idea and this story prepared. But when it's your opportunity to ask those questions, focus on how you would fit into the company.
I think that's a great piece of advice and a perfect way to wrap up our episode today. So, first, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule to sit down with me and discuss this topic to help our students kind of reflect on the importance of networking, talking with the recruiters, and realizing it's not nearly as scary as they may think it is. If students are interested in connecting with you in any way, what would be the best course of action for them?
Please reach out to career services and they know how to get a hold of me. However, I mean, my email inbox is always open and my LinkedIn is always open for individuals.
And if you ever need other resources, we're here for you. You can always make an appointment on Handshake, or you can send us an email to career@mtu.edu, or of course, always walk over to the second floor of the admin building. We're up in 220. So thank you guys for joining us for another episode here of Husky Careers Unleashed, and we look forward to sharing more stories and advice with you in future episodes.